We arrived at the Tehama County Fairgrounds on Thursday afternoon, the day before the clinic. The clinic was being held in the arena where the vaquero roping competition, the Californios, used to be held. It's a very large and entirely indoor arena. I wasn't sure how Aries would handle it, so we went early. We would also be riding with 35 other riders. After exploring a bit, I let Aries settle into his stall. Day 1 started out nice and slow. One of the things Buck likes a horse to be able to tolerate is a flag, so I had to make sure Aries was indeed okay with the flag. Watching Buck and his bridle horse Arc, spelled A-R-C, was amazing. As he likes to say, the horse is his legs, and he can take them anywhere. In the afternoon, Buck brought out his 4-year-old mare, Gidget. I was a bit nervous. Enough time had passed since I rode Aries last that I had built up quite a fear of riding him. Also, his new saddling problem, where he demonstrated his ability to fly like a kite, had me generating some terrible accident scenarios. And of course, if I'm nervous, so is Aries. I didn't get on him for a little while, but when I did, I was nervous. So I got off and did some groundwork for the rest of the day. I went up to Buck at the end of the day and asked if maybe we could find a more confident rider to ride Aries. He said nah, he felt I could handle it. A compliment, but I was looking for a way out. And this started the mind shift that I would go through over the course of the weekend. On the morning of day 2, I walked Aries around for a little while before heading in to watch the colt starting class. Aries and I probably should have been in the colt start class, but it was full, so we took what we could get. Watching the colt class was still a very worthwhile experience. Before my class, I had to saddle Aries. His saddling problem had me so worried that he would flip his saddle underneath him during that critical few moments between tightening his cinch and putting on his breast collar that my legs would shake when I would saddle him. Thankfully, I always got the collar on before he exploded, but I couldn't figure out why he was exploding. He was never bothered by the saddle before, so why now? After several leaping bucks, Aries settled down. I also noticed what seemed to initiate the buck was moving his hind end. He could move his front legs, but the moment those hind feet came loose, he would launch. This is one of Aries' core problems, a locked up hind end. A lot of horses have this problem. They don't want to go forward, they don't want to yield the hindquarters, or they buck. All of these problems are from having a sticky hind end. I also took out another lunge line and played with both a belly rope and having the rope go behind him, both of which he has dealt with before and didn't have much reaction. Well, now he did. Again, I think he wasn't even checked in before, so he had no reaction. Now he does, which is great, but I have to go back and redo several things. Another possible contributor is I believe Aries has some hindgut ulcers, as most horses do. He is getting treated for them, and his symptoms have been improving dramatically. Only time and continued treatment will help. I went into the second afternoon session just as nervous as I was the day before. The idea of riding in a group of 35 horses was terrifying to me. What if Aries exploded and threw me hard? Or worse, what if he ran into someone else and hurt them? But I got on anyway. I felt guilty for not being able to be the confident rider I knew Aries needed, but I also felt that I wouldn't get there if I didn't at least try. I started to do the exercises everyone had been practicing the day before. I asked Aries to do a lateral head flexion, bringing the head around to my leg on both sides. Then I'd ask for him to yield his hindquarters over. Then we would do a small serpentine or figure 8. For all of these exercises, I was having to work rather hard to keep Aries moving forward. I had to kick him, which I have never needed to do before. One of the things Buck repeated over and over was do less than you think you need to do to get the job done. If that doesn't work, do what needs to be done. His point is that you want your horse to respond to the slightest suggestion from you. If they don't, get your point across. This will help the horse realize that the good deal, as he puts it, is preferable to the second request. On the morning of day 3, Buck had the colt start class riding. There were a couple with sticky hind ends that he wanted to get going forward, so he brought them in the round pen individually and sent them around from atop his saddle horse. This mare in particular was very sticky. She seemed bothered by the back cinch as well, and Buck suggested that she be ridden without it for a little while. It could be added later. I used the round pen today to saddle Aries. I had one of Buck's assistants watching to see if there was anything I should be doing differently. Legs shaking and all, I saddled him, and he blew up. It wasn't quite as dramatic as the day before, which was an improvement at least. I was determined to ride more today and fix those problems from yesterday. While on the ground, I asked Aries to yield his hindquarters when I touched the stirrup to his side. Initially, he didn't move, but I did less than I felt I needed. Then I made my point. He got pretty responsive pretty fast. A point Buck would later mention to me is the difference between escaping and acceptance. I don't want Aries to escape from my request. I want him to accept it and move. Another problem I wanted to address was Aries sneering at other horses. Every time he tried to sneer, I gave him something to do. The idea is that if the horse is busy doing what you ask, they don't have time to spend on their own problems. Later on, once I get more confident, if he sneers at another horse, I'll push him forward out into a canter. Or if he wanted to be nasty to another horse, he can work harder. Day 4 would both be the worst and best day. I started out the day by grazing Aries, which I hadn't done much of. This made me late to the colt start class. When I got there, I was told that Buck had been looking for me. He was talking about escaping versus accepting. Aries had a problem now because he had been escaping my requests, not accepting them. Later during his morning talk, he looked for me again, this time I was there, and made a point about not letting me get out of riding my horse that weekend. He said he knew I didn't want to be treated that way, like I couldn't do it myself. Buck seems to be able to judge very quickly what each person can handle. He was right. I was the one who was trying to escape now. After the colt start class ended, I tracked Buck down to hear his suggestions regarding escaping versus accepting. He got a little forceful with me about how I had been using a fence to get Aries to go sideways. He said don't use a crutch. If you can't get it in the open, you don't have it. This stung pretty bad. It's like being told you've raised your kid incorrectly. I went on a very long walk after that and thought a lot about how I needed to change some things. That was a long and troubled walk for me. I made the decision not to ride in the last class. I had plenty of holes I could fill on the ground. You can never do enough groundwork. Never. Buck starts every day with groundwork, even with his most advanced horses. It's a way of checking in on how they are doing that day. It was a wonderfully successful afternoon of groundwork. I got Aries very light in his flexions and yields. At one point, Aries spooked at a metal gate. Buck came over and said that Aries had a fear of his blind spot that all horses have directly behind them. Aries is probably particularly strong about that from being wild for 11 years. Buck suggested I put a rope around his hind foot and teach him to stop when the rope is pulled. This will help Aries deal with that blind spot better. This was a very successful clinic, but sometimes it's hard to stand in front of a very strong mirror. Aries, by the way, was a very different horse as well. He seemed much more grounded when we left, much more happy to be in his skin. I can't explain why except to say that the work Buck offers to people and the words he shares can cause huge changes in both you and your horse if you let them.